Good afternoon, everyone. I think we're just going to wait here for one more minute to see how many people get on, as these Zooms have a little bit of a lag. Okay, everyone. My name is Neil Levesque. I'm the executive director here at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College. As you can see, I'm here broadcasting through Zoom at the Institute. We have a classroom full of students down the hall with our student ambassador program. Many of these students have some great questions for today's speaker. I just want to also mention that AARP, which we're very involved with, particularly as we go into this election, making sure that people feel safe going to the polls, that they're educated as to their responsibilities as a citizen and the responsibilities of residency. They're our partner on many of these types of programs, and they are today. Once again, AARP has been a great partner here for the Institute. Just a couple housekeeping notes. So as you can see from the recording dot here in the corner, this is being recorded. So careful what you say. And it's going to be rebroadcast not only at the St. Anselm College campus, but potentially in other channels as well. Today we have a longtime friend of mine, a real professional in the area of civics and voting and the responsibilities of residency, Deputy Secretary of State Dave Scanlan. Dave has served, he's a newcomer. He's served in this position for 18 years, which is probably the age of some of our students who are watching. So he's been here for quite a while. And although the issues of voting and domicile and residency have been going on, particularly in New Hampshire, for quite a while, and they're ever changing, Dave has really kept abreast of all of these things. And he's a real expert at all of this. I get asked these voting questions all the time. And I thought, why not bring in the expert who can really sort of describe, particularly for college students, but this is not just for college students, what the responsibilities you have and what your rights are for someone who is here. So thank you, Dave, for being on today. I want to just sort of throw something out to you. So let's say that I am a student here at St. Anselm College. My parents live in Cape Cod, and but I'm putting my head down on a pillow every night here in Goffstown, New Hampshire. Can I vote in this coming election? And if so, how do I go about that? And what are my responsibilities?
Okay, great. Well, first, Neil, thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you and your group of students. These are really important issues, and I know that they are on the minds of a lot of students. Voting in New Hampshire, especially among college students, has been an issue over the last few years. There have been some court rulings in the past that have thrown into question what type of a status a student has to be able to vote in New Hampshire. And the recent Supreme Court decision or ruling last spring helped clarify that quite a bit. So in really any state in the country, a voter has to be a resident in order to have their domicile in the community in which that person wants to vote. New Hampshire, for a period of time, due to a court ruling, had a judge come out and say, you don't have to be a resident of New Hampshire to vote here, you merely have to have your domicile here. And so that was confusing. It threw into question exactly what that meant, especially within the college student community. And I think that the Supreme Court issue helped to clarify that quite a bit. So the bottom line is that to vote in a community, you have to be a resident of that community, which means that you are invested in the community in terms of your civic participation. It means that being a resident, you are subject to the laws of that community and to the state of New Hampshire in this case. And there are laws in the state that apply to residents. One is that if you're going to drive a vehicle in New Hampshire, you're obligated to have a New Hampshire driver's license. If you own a vehicle and you have it in New Hampshire, you're obligated to register that vehicle in order to be able to drive here. Beyond that, the statutes in most states and at the federal level are quite clear that students have a choice. They can claim the community that they live in prior to going to college, usually a parent's home. They can continue to claim that as their residence, and that's where that student would legally vote from. Or if a student is living in a community while they're going to college and they believe that that is now their residence, they're civically engaged, and they're willing to abide by the laws of the state of New Hampshire that apply to residents, then they are also entitled to vote in that community. You can't vote in both places. You have to choose one, but that choice is left to the voter or the student.
Well, thanks for spelling that out. So let's say that you are invested here in Goffstown. You're putting your head down on a pillow every night here in Goffstown. You believe that this is your residency. But of course, soon, as we approach, November 20th, I think it is, and Thanksgiving, you may go back to your parents' home in Cape Cod for an extended period of time. So switching your driver's license and doing all of that type of thing, what if a person in their mind today is civically engaged here in Goffstown, believes they are a resident of Goffstown, but then in November comes, they're going to be back in Cape Cod, and then they believe that they are a resident there. Is there any further obligation to notify the town or any other obligation further?
No, there are no durational requirements related to when a person becomes a resident. That fact is established by evidence, and it's evidence that the supervisors of the checklist will look at when they decide to approve a voter registration or not. Living in a dormitory on a college campus can be considered a resident if that's what the student believes and represents. Once you become a resident and you have established that status, you maintain your domicile for voting purposes until you establish one in another location. So if you are going to vote in the November primary in New Hampshire because you believe this is your residence, and then you're going to go home in Cape Cod or Massachusetts for an extended holiday for Thanksgiving, maybe because of COVID conditions, the school is going to shut down, but your intent is to come back to New Hampshire to go back to school, return to your residence, then you do not lose your domicile here because you have not established one in another location. But if you go back to Massachusetts and let's say you get a job or there's some other event that is going to tie you to that location, and you set down roots to the point that you believe your domicile has now changed and there is evidence to support that, then that would become your new domicile, and that is the location where you would then participate in civic affairs, including voting.
So as we're going towards November, what are some of the deadlines here? Let's say, again, I'm a student here at St. Anselm and I believe that I'm going to choose that I'm a resident here in Goffstown and I want to register to vote. What's the process for that? What do I need to do to make that happen?
You would go to the polls on the day of the election if you don't visit the town clerk or the supervisors of the checklist beforehand. You would fill out a voter registration form. There would be documents that are requested because you have to establish that you meet the qualifications to be a voter in New Hampshire. That would be, you would have to prove your identity. You would have to prove that you are 18 as of the day of the election. You would have to prove that you are a U.S. citizen, and you would have to prove that you are domiciled or a resident of Goffstown or whatever community that you're living in while you're going to college. Those qualifications can be proven with documents that are in your possession, usually in terms of identity, age. You can show a driver's license, and that driver's license, when you register, does not have to be from New Hampshire. It can be from Massachusetts or some other state, as long as it's a legally issued governmental ID. You can prove your domicile by showing a utility bill or some document from St. Anselm's that shows that you are a student there.
Like a college ID.
A college ID would suffice. And then for citizenship, usually that's a birth certificate or a passport or some other document. But if you have none of those things in your possession when you show up at the polls where you can register to vote, then you can sign an affidavit where you swear under the penalties of voter fraud that those items or those qualifications that you're claiming are in fact true. They will be accepted by the supervisors of the checklist. And if they have no other reason to believe that what you're telling them is not true, they will be accepted. And then you will be able to get in the check-in line to receive an absentee ballot, check in, and then you can proceed to vote.
So if I have a letter that is sent to me at my address at the college mail center, would that in any way show proof, even if it wasn't a utility bill? It could be, a letter from some other entity.
Yeah, if it's any mailing that would be reasonably sent to a person's residence, that could be accepted as proof of domicile.
So just to clarify, so on election day, I can go to the, I was going to say town hall, but it's actually changed here in Goffstown. I can go to the election location, the polling center, and I can show proof of ID, show proof that I am here in Goffstown, New Hampshire. If I don't have that, I can fill out a form that will allow me to attest and swear under perjury that in fact I am here. So because a lot of our students are not, obviously because of COVID, they're not really allowed to go home between now and November 20th. And so it's not like they can go home and dig through the family safe for their birth certificate. I don't even know where mine is. And so, they're stuck with these questions. They have what they have here and not much more. And on the driver's license thing, so if they don't have a driver's license, they need to show some other sort of form of ID, that government ID that shows that this is in fact them.
So the act of registering requires filling out the registration form, and then it involves showing the proof of qualifications, which I described earlier. Even if a voter does not have something to prove their ID, they can sign an affidavit at the polls under the penalties of voter fraud or perjury that just says what I'm telling you is true. And if there is no evidence to the contrary, then supervisors of the checklist are going to accept that affidavit. So you can walk into the polling place without a driver's license or a student ID, and as long as you provide the information on the voter registration form, you can meet the qualifications by signing affidavits. In terms of when you can register to vote and where you can register to vote, there are opportunities prior to Election Day where a student can go to the town clerk's office and fill out a voter registration form. The supervisors are required to meet in session for the purpose of updating the checklist, including accepting registrations. between 6 and 13 days before the election. So if a student is interested in doing that, then they should call the town clerk or look for the notice on when that event is going to take place. After the supervisors meet, there is a cutoff period from registrations between the date that they meet and election day, so that they have an opportunity to correct and update the checklist that will be used on the day of the election. And then on the day of the election, voters that show up at the polls to vote, who are not registered, can actually register on the day. It's actually very easy to register to vote in New Hampshire, because there are different options in terms of when they can do that.
You keep referring to the supervisors of the checklist. I just wanted to, if you could just give us a quick sort of description of who are these people, and what is their power in the town?
The supervisors of the checklist are in a town. It's a 3-member board. They are elected by the voters in that town. They serve 6-year terms. So there's one member of the checklist that is elected every 2 years. They have a very important role, because they are the only individuals in the state of New Hampshire that are authorized to place names on the checklist and to take names off the checklist. So that's their primary function, is they manage the checklist in the state of New Hampshire. Your name does not get on the checklist unless you go through them. And then when voters are no longer qualified, for whatever reason, they pass away, they move out of state, they're otherwise disqualified, then it's up to the supervisors of the checklist to remove those names so that the lists are as up to date as possible.
I'm getting these things in the mail saying, send this in and I'll get an absentee ballot that I can fill out. How legitimate are those types of instruments? And if I wanted to vote absentee because I don't want to go, let's say that I'm a registered voter in Goffstown, but I don't want to go to the town hall because of the pandemic, what is the procedure for something like that?
New Hampshire is a state where an excuse or a reason is required to obtain an absentee ballot. And in our state constitution, the 2 reasons are absence, you're just not going to be around on the day of the election, or a disability. For the purpose of the 2020 elections, the governor and the secretary of state and the attorney general have determined that concern over COVID-19 constitutes a disability. So basically, anybody in New Hampshire that has a concern about COVID-19 this year can request and receive an absentee ballot. Every year, the political campaigns or the political parties make an effort to make sure that everybody that wants to vote has an opportunity to vote. And so they advertise ways that voters can do that. And one of them is making sure that absentee ballot applications are flowing freely. So in the first instance, you can request an absentee ballot application from your town clerk. And you can use your own initiative to do that. But many of you have probably already received mailings from candidates or parties suggesting that you can vote by absentee and it's easy. And really all you have to do is fill out the form that they have submitted to you for that purpose. And that is legitimate if that mailing is done properly. So if a application for an absentee ballot is coming from somebody other than the town clerk or the Secretary of State's office, they're supposed to be identified on the form similar to the signature of a paid ad. The person responsible for it has to let the voter know, but there's nothing wrong with using that form as long as it contains all of the important information.
Yes, I think there was something in the news about somebody who potentially violated that yesterday. I won't have you comment on that. So I have a question from a student. If I mail an absentee ballot and it does not arrive in time for the election, does it still count? How does that work?
In New Hampshire, absentee ballots have to be received by the clerk by 5 o'clock on the day of the election. If the ballot is received the next day or any time after the day of the election, then those ballots will be rejected as being late. So because of COVID this year and knowing that there is an increase in the number of absentee ballots that are being used, and understanding that the Postal Service has had some issues recently in terms of the amount of time it takes to have mail delivered, we're encouraging voters that if you know you're going to vote by absentee ballot to do it early. You know, if you know you're going to vote now, make the request for an absentee ballot now, and when you receive it, fill it out and mail it back into the clerk. Or you can hand deliver it to the clerk too. If the clerk's office is open and you're nearby and you just want to hand it over, that's one way of making sure that your ballot gets in on time and will be counted.
It saves you waiting in line potentially in a November election where the lines can be quite long. Staying a little bit on that subject. So there's so many people voting absentee right now, and these are coming into the town clerk's office. Do they actually open them ahead of the election and start a count, or do they do it on that election day? How does that work? Because I mean, the potential here is that there's going to be a lot of counting going on election day. And do you think because of that, that we could see results later than we normally would?
In a normal year, the processing of an absentee ballot would take place on the day of the election. But because there is an increased volume of absentee voting this year, the legislature passed a bill at the tail end of the session last June. And in that legislation, they created an opportunity for the local election officials to pre-process absentee ballots on the Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or Monday before the election. And what that allows the local election officials to do is to open the outer envelope and look at the affidavit envelope, which contains the absentee ballot. They don't get to open the affidavit envelope and look at the ballot on that day. They can make sure that the affidavit that is on the affidavit envelope is properly executed. If it is not, the local election officials actually have an opportunity to try and contact that voter to cure any defect that they have found, so that they can make sure that that voter has a chance to have their ballot counted if a problem was encountered. And then all of the affidavit envelopes, ballots can be organized. The checklist can be highlighted for each name where an absentee ballot is waiting to be finally processed, and to streamline that process on the day of the election, so that when Tuesday rolls around and the polls are open, all the moderator has to do is open the affidavit envelope, remove the ballot, put it in a pile, and then as the names of those voters are being crossed off the checklist in alphabetical order, the absentee ballots can be fed through the optical scan counting device or placed in the ballot box if it's a hand count town.
Excellent. But there's no way to know that when you send it in that it's going to get counted. But I guess the same could be said unless you see the ballot in person go in, there's no way to really know that it's being counted. That's
true. So, and any absentee voter can track their absentee ballot on the Secretary of State website. And if you go to the home page, you will see one of the tiles on the home page says, voter information. And you can there's an app on there that you can use by typing in your name and your birth date, provided you're already registered and you're on the checklist. And by getting on there, you can see the date that the clerk received your absentee ballot request. You can see the date that the clerk mailed the absentee ballot to you. You can see the date that the absentee ballot was received from you back to the clerk. And then ultimately, you'll be able to see whether your ballot was actually counted on the day of the election, or if it was rejected, which does happen in some instances, the reason for the rejection. The most common reasons for rejection of ballots is the ballot was received after the day of the election, or the voter forgot to sign the affidavit on the affidavit envelope.
Well, David, I think that's all the questions we have. I think that there's a real, it's very evident why in New Hampshire we have had really trouble-free elections for quite some time, particularly during our presidential primary, which there was a question as to whether or not we'd be able to pull it off as a state. I think that one thing that is clearly evident to the students here today is that we have a very sound, well thought out system with some excellent people who are behind our elections here in New Hampshire, one of the most civically engaged states in the nation. And I want to thank you for being on with us today, but I also really want to thank you for your service. This is a very serious business that we're in, and you're really exemplify that. And your answers today were great, and I appreciate that. And on behalf of all of our students here at the Institute of Politics, we thank you for your time.
Thank you, Neil. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks.